All right. Effective trait number 6 is speak the truth. Speak the truth. Our niceness culture in our church, do y'all know what I'm talking about? Has created our inability to handle conflict. Let's unpack that a little bit. First of all, we have led our churches in many times to say that a healthy church is a church with no conflict. If there is no conflict, there is probably apathy. And when we have apathy, we are probably not being missional in our purpose of making disciples. It's not that conflict is bad. Conflict means you're pushing the envelope. You're probably doing some creative, innovative things. But it's our ability to handle or manage conflict that makes the difference. Too often, our churches try to handle conflict in the parking lot after the meeting. The meeting was intended to address the conflict. But unfortunately, because we live in this niceness culture of saying that's not the way church people act, they wouldn't contradict what someone else says. Instead, we remain silent, we don't speak what's on our mind, and instead we bellyache in the parking lot. Here's another challenge that we have when we're not speaking the truth. When we're not speaking the truth, what we're saying is we don't feel comfortable, we don't feel trusted, we don't feel we're in an environment to be able to speak the truth, or there has been an expectation set up that truthfulness or conflict are not healthy. But furthermore, our niceness culture has led us to the thought, maybe even the belief, that our relationships with one another inside the church trumps the mission. Did y'all hear that? Too many times we allow maintaining relationships with one another above the more important mission of making disciples. Now, please don't hear that I am suggesting just blow the place up. I mean, we need to speak with grace and love. However, if we're not being truth tellers, we're going to have trouble aligning. When I am working with our boards and asking them to set up leadership covenants, this is one of the things that we talk about a lot. Because if you're the leaders of the church, we have to be able to have those difficult conversations. I want you to have spirited, holy conversations. Now, when the decision is made, whatever that is, whether you agree with it or not, you walk out of there with a unified voice. That's part of our covenant together. But everything aligns back to the mission. We have gotten ourselves into trouble by valuing our niceness or pursuing niceness over our mission, and has allowed us not to be able to handle conflict in a healthy way. If you speak the truth, even in love, in this niceness culture of our churches, you will be both admired and probably unappreciated. But appreciation is not always what we can be looking for when we're being effective leaders. Most of the time, some of our most unappreciated leaders are the ones that have moved us forward the most. Some people are going to love it because they love that action and that speaking the truth, and other people are go, oh my gosh, what would the neighbors think? That was my mother. My mother would always say, oh, we couldn't talk about that. What would the neighbors think? Because it became more about perceptions than it is about the truth of what was going on. And so because of that, we couldn't talk about it. Because if we talked about it, somebody might know. Or somebody might be uncomfortable. Or we might have to face the truth if we talked about the truth. Speaking the truth, if you only do it without grace, you will simply not be heard. So if we go in like a steamroller, we're not going to get anywhere. But if people know that you're coming from a place of love and respect, you're going to be able to get somewhere with that, of saying, I'm just here to hold up the mirror, and I know you may not like what it looks like, and I'm sorry about that, but I think to be healthy, this is what we need to look at, talk about, and understand that this is where we're at. So, a note of caution for all of you. Truth-telling has to be managed well, or it can hurt people, both the receiver and you. So, but please don't do it because we're afraid, but do it. Have you noticed there's a theme today? It's all this balance. You can't do one or the other. It's the balance of something in between. So make sure that you are managing the amount of truth-telling you're doing at any one time. There's only so much people can take about what they're seeing in the mirror at any one time. Leading with grace helps people be more open to hearing the moments of truth-telling. If people just feel you're there to run over them, they're not going to hear anything you have to say. You're going to be, maybe even be called a bully. But if they hear that it's coming from a place, you will more likely be heard. So timing and dosage is everything. So this is why, remember one of the first things we talked about was showing up and moving in? That's why all of that part is going to help you when it comes to the truth-telling. Building those relationships, being invested in the community. When we do those pieces, we can get to number 6 much more quickly. But just make sure that you don't talk about truth-telling in a place where people's emotions are raw. Or there's high conflict, and so then we do the truth-telling out of spite rather than love and grace. We have to do it, but make sure that we manage it well. Niceness does not always lead to faithfulness or effectiveness. But somehow we have allowed the niceness to prevail. We want to be nice folks, but most importantly, we're here as leaders to push the envelope of effectiveness, but more importantly, faithfulness. And faithfulness looks to be living the life that's moving closer and closer to being Jesus-like as we disciple others to do the same. But when we get stuck and we're not willing to talk about the things that are keeping us stuck, we're not going to be as effective or as faithful as we could, or shall I even say should be. You have to lead with grace, and the truth comes right after. All right, this is a little more of a difficult one. So think about the numbers. Remember, they were 1 to 10. 1 being we're struggling with that trait. 10 being we've got it all figured out. We're good there. What's your number? Write your number down. All right, turn to your neighbor and share a little bit about truth-telling. All right, number 7 is leading up and managing down. Leading up and managing down. For goodness sakes, what does that mean, right? Leading up. So let's unpack the first part of it. Leading up would talk about where do you put your energy and attention? Where do you pour into? Where are those places of effectiveness and fruitfulness and where the sparks are? Managing down is the opposite. What are those things that don't need your attention anymore? What are those things that need to diminish in size or diminish in the resources that is taken? So you don't have to go in and kill stuff, but you can manage things down because what you give attention to will more likely grow, right? So are you giving your attention to the right things? Lead up intentionally and manage down intentionally. So when you're trying to figure out what that means, what do I want to protect and grow? That's the leading up piece. All right, the next is, what do I want to manage and shrink? That's the managing down piece. In order to do that, you've got to know what your priorities are. And your priorities, I sure hope, are in alignment with how are you doing of making disciples that disciple others. Right? Sometimes our priorities are not in alignment, and sometimes we have to speak the truth as pastors with our leaders to say, I am appointed here to make disciples for not only those of us that are here, but even more importantly, those of us who are not yet here. And the priorities that perhaps you've set for me are not in alignment with why I'm here. Can we talk about that? Can you imagine that conversation? But how many of us have been in situations where that conversation has needed to happen because we're frustrated in the situations that we're in, because expectations have been set that don't allow you to be the most effective you can in the purposes you're there of discipling others who disciple. Another way to determine is the difference of urgency and importance. Are you all familiar with Pareto's principle? Sometimes they call it the 80-20 rule, right? 80-20 rule. So let me give you some examples. Maybe 80% of the things in your closet you don't wear, you primarily wear 20%. We have to replace our carpet because 20% of it is worn when 80% isn't because of the high traffic areas, but everything under the furniture looks great, looks new, right? So what if we think about it this way? If we're thinking about being effective leaders, Pareto principle has been proven over and over again in many scenarios. Thinking about that principle as it pertains to our ministry, would that suggest that 80% of what we do really doesn't matter? I'm not suggesting that be the truth, but it sure makes us maybe think about how we're using our time and what we're leading up and what we're managing down. There was a study done that if you use 20% of your day, 96 minutes of a typical workday, let's call it that. 20% of a typical workday is about 96 minutes. Okay? Now, some of us have higher energy in the morning. Some of us like peak out midday. Some of us are those afternoon warriors. And sometimes we have some night owls, right? You know which of those you are. What if you were to consider the highest energy time of your day to be the most productive, and you intentionally do those things in those 96 minutes? So they did a test with a few CEOs. And those particular CEOs were the morning people. So they came in, and from 8 to 9:36, no phone calls, no emails, they handled the priorities of the day. And then the rest of their day was empty on their calendar. They got more done than they had ever been able to do before because They concentrated for those 96 minutes and got things done. And then they allowed the margin of the rest of the day to handle the rest. Instead of, I have great intentions of getting this done, but the urgency of the fires that keep coming across my desk through my email and through my phone and through people kept me from getting the very things that needed to get done. But we have to know what our priorities are, and we need to align our high productive time into those activities. Please don't schedule activities that drain you in your high productivity time. How many times do we do that? Right? Now, we don't have 100% control of our calendar. I get that. But we have more control over it than we sometimes lead ourselves to believe. How can we get past the urgency and get to the really important things? We have to be strategic and intentional in making that happen. I don't know about you, but I can come in on a day, and if I have nothing planned, my day still gets filled up. How about you? But I tell you what, if there are 2 or 3 priorities that I need to get done, and I make the intentional effort of making sure that gets done, they get done. It's planning, it's prioritizing, it's understanding what's important rather than what's in your face screaming at you, which may not have anything to do with what you need to put your attention on that day. It is all about leadership, friends, of yourself first, then others, and then the organization. Here are levels of leadership. If you think about how you grow as a leader. Before you can lead anyone else, you need to lead yourself well, which means you need to have your act together. We talked about the spiritual rhythm of your life. There's a rhythm to life in general. What does that rhythm look like, feel like? Do you know when you're kind of living at your potential, your max? You know, it's just like you're firing all cylinders. Y'all know what I mean? And then there's time where you go, boy, I need a tune-up. I need a new set of spark plugs. I got a flat tire, whatever metaphor you want. You know when you're kind of out of rhythm, right? So you've got to have the rhythm of your life figured out and be working that. Not that we don't fall off and need adjustments from time to time, but for the most part, we need to be leading ourselves well 90% of the time before we can lead others. It's kind of like the modeling piece again, right? But it's also being effective in who you are as a person and how you're showing up. The second level is you lead one other person. What's the one-on-one? How are you leading one other person? Followed by the third level is leading a team of people. And then we can lead an organization. Then we can lead leaders. It's a different skill set. Even though it's a smaller group sometimes when you lead leaders than you lead an organization, but it's a different skill set. It's turning up the requirements of what it takes when we're leading leaders. And then you can lead a network of people or businesses, and then you lead the world. See, too many times we ask people who haven't figured out how to lead themselves to lead leaders. There's a book called Ultimately Responsible by Sue Nilsson Kibbe, and she talks about the type of people. And see, unfortunately, we put worker bees who love just to do their own thing, but because they do their own thing really well, we make them a leader, and we set them up to fail. Because we haven't helped them develop as a leader, or we're asking them to work outside their giftedness. So it's important to not only know where we're at personally in our leadership development, but it's also important to recognize that in other people so that we're not asking people to do things at different levels than they have been equipped to do. And we go back to the very first question, are we born leaders? Or can we learn to be leaders? And remember, we discovered the answer is both. So we may have some leadership qualities in some folks, but unless we help equip them, it may keep them at a lower level than they have capacity for if we were to invest in them. So the questions are, where are you at? And where are your leaders at? So I want you to take a look at all of those different levels. Which level do you think you've achieved? And then to be thinking about, if you were to go to that next level, what would it take? How would you need to invest in yourself? What would you need to do or not do in order to get to that next level of leadership? And what would allow you to take that step? What's in your way? What do you need to clear out in order to take that next step? So this is kind of a two-part evaluation this time. So first of all, I want you to write your number, all right? And then I want you to think about what leadership level that you're at before you spend some time. But before you do that, I want to give you a cautionary note. For every change you want to bring, you have to increase the level of care. People are not going to follow you unless they know that you care about them. So if you are a change agent, you need to make sure that your congregation knows that you love them in the meantime. Now, hear this. The larger your church, the less personal pastoral care you're going to need to do. It will need to shift to congregational care through teams, but please equip those teams. Don't just change the terminology and expectation without equipping them, right? But you've got to love on the people or make sure those people are loved. You're sent to lead at your church, not to follow. But make sure that when you look back, you're not out on the limb by yourself, that people are truly following you. You cannot be a leader if you don't turn over your shoulder and see that people are following you. All right? First thing, what's your number on a scale of 1 to 10? Secondly, what leadership level are you at? Now, hear this. There's a difference between what level of leadership you are at versus what you are equipped and gifted for. And then number 3, turn to your partner and share. I'll give you a few minutes. All right, number 8, effective pastors preach and worship well. Preach and worship well. So let's first talk about the elements of good preaching. First of all, it's the ability to connect with the congregation, both verbally and non-verbally. It's that person that can sit in the pew and feel like they're the only one you're talking to. How are you connecting with people? How are their eyes not glazing over, right? That they're involved. Need to know how to tell a good story. Be a great storyteller. People will hear you through stories more so than anything else. Use humor, but use it appropriately, please. They want to see the humanness, the fun side of you. And the next one is the use of visual, multimedia, and social media. What we're looking for is different ways for people to take in the information. You know, some are visual learners, some are tactile. I mean, you know all of that. Are you providing all of those opportunities when someone is listening for a message from you? Are you engaging them through as many senses as possible, not only in the sermon, but in the worship experience? And frankly, when we talk about all that, it's like, wow, that's kind of overwhelming to think about all of those elements every Sunday. Sunday comes every week, right? So this is where, friends, it is helpful for you to have some worship design people around you. Now, that may look like a person or two, depending on your context and your church size, or it may be a team of 5 or 6 or 8. But it is really difficult for you to be creative and think through all of these different senses by yourself, week in and week out. So who's working with you? Who's helping you think through some of the creative ways or the different ways? Or what are even the messages that the congregation needs to hear? It's helpful to hear that perspective from others besides just what you're hearing or your perceptions. So gather some people around you to help with that. Good preaching also involves biblically based with some depth. People want to still hear how it's connected biblically, scripturally, right? But don't spend all your time there. People have Google. People can find out information, all the information they want. But what they're really looking for is, how is this going to make a difference in my life? How do I apply this? We're looking for transformation of people's hearts and souls that eventually transform their lives so that they go out and they are so excited about what's going on in their life that they can't help but share that with other people. 1/3 needs to be information, but 2/3 needs to be talking about application. Help me tie the lesson that you're trying to tell me to the application in my life when I walk out of here. If it's all information, you're going to lose people. We come from a past when the pastor and the lawyer were the only people that were highly educated in towns. And some of us were taught that that's the way we still preach, is we're the teachers of the town. But that is not the case anymore. People are highly educated and information is available at their fingertips, literally, at their fingertips. But what people are looking for is, how's this going to make a difference in my life? Application is so important. It needs to be lively. If you got people falling asleep, I mean, I know there's a 1 or 2 that you nap no matter how great it is. But it's got to be lively, that people are engaged. What's the one thing? Too many times we try to do 5 sermons or 8 sermons in one. What's the one thing? Sometimes we water down the very thing that we're trying to get them to take away because we try to give them too much. What's the one thing you want me to walk away from today knowing? What's the one thing you want me to do? And everything Everything, not just the sermon, but everything in that worship service needs to flow into the one thing. When we try to give them too much, we give them nothing. I walked out of a sermon the other day and I said, I'm almost sure that there were 8 sermons in that, but I can't even tell you where they were headed. Because it felt like it was almost, like those pinball machines, like you're headed this way and it bounced off of there and then you over here and it bounced off of here. And you're going, help me tie it all together. Don't leave that to your people. Tie it together for them. Here's the information. Here's how it applies. Or here's what I'm asking you to do with it. Or here's what I'm challenging you to think about. It's about movement. It's about change. It's about transformation. And it comes from the center of your sermon. If you're not a good preacher, you're not going to be able to have change throughout the church. If they can't stay with you on Sunday, they're not going to be able to be with you as likely Monday through Saturday. If you preach change, you can get some, but if you don't preach well, it's hard to get any change. It goes hand in hand. They got to know that you're passionate and they're going to ask for move in me, challenge me, help me grow, help me make a difference when I walk out that door, not in my life, but in other lives as well. Preaching is to worship as worship is to the rest of the church. Let me unpack that a little bit, okay? If you don't have a really good worship experience, the rest of your church is probably not going to be a great experience or growth either. And you're probably going to end up having a really difficult time having a great worship experience if the sermon isn't good. They connect greatly. So, obviously, it's pretty important. And are we putting the resources towards this very important component? We know that effective churches or effective pastors preach well and do worship well. Okay, now, when we're talking about the worship piece, make sure that we have 3 wows on Sunday. One of them is children's ministry. If you're going to want to reach families, you're going to have a children's ministry that people want to be a part of. And it needs to be safe. People are looking for safety, check-in and check-out systems. And that needs to be the most innovative, clean space in the building. That is the one place, please, oh please, do not accept donations for. Because too often things are donated because they've been in the basement for 10 years, and then there's recalls and all sorts of things to think about there. That's the one place you want to invest in and have no question that you care about that children because of the space. I was working with one church, and literally, the children in youth space were in the dungeon, and the congregation referred to it as that. It was an old building that they had to dig out the basement, and they put stones in. And you were only 3 steps down, and you knew you were entering the dungeon. It was that terrible of a smell. And yes, they had mold problems. But guess what? The adult Sunday school class was right outside the sanctuary in the newest space. But we sent our children and our youth to the dungeon with all the hand-me-down furniture and chairs. We can say no to donations. Did you all know that? Especially furniture and sometimes we need to. A church doesn't need 16 pianos. You can have policies around saying no to donations. Y'all know that, right? I'm not talking money. Y'all know that, right? But some of the other stuff that just shows up that we really don't need, and then it becomes junk, and then we've got rooms full of stuff that we don't use, and then we don't have any space for ministry. But children's space, the cleanest, the most convenient to the worship. Do you know, most of the time, the thing that is most convenient to the sanctuary is the office. The office. That's where the nursery should be. The one that's most convenient to the sanctuary. Because imagine someone coming into the building, they don't want to take their children down the hall, around the corner, and down the steps. They want to be able to access their children quickly. So where you put it in the space you give them, and that there are friendly, smiling faces who are energetic and love children, that would be helpful if they're working the children's area. People aren't going to want to leave their children in a place where grumpy people are. Choose those people wisely. The second wow of Sunday morning should be of the worship experience. And when I talk about wow worship, that means that when people walk out of here, they go, wow, I experienced Christ. Wow, I cannot wait to post on Facebook about the awesome experience I just had. Had anybody say that lately? Wow, I cannot wait to share with my neighbor, my coworker, my family about what just happened. Wow, I can't wait to invite someone to come with me. See, that's what worship is supposed to be about, that it moves people in a way that they can't help but share it. And the third piece about wow on Sunday is hospitality. I can't say enough about hospitality. Y'all, that's our first impressions. We will not get the opportunity for a second first impression. And sometimes we blow it before the worship service even starts. And you have one piece of hospitality that you need to pay attention to that occurs before they ever get to the church. Y'all know what that is? Say it. Greeters. Before they ever get to the church, there's one previous piece. What'd you say, Joanne? Parking lot? Online presence. You may never, ever get the opportunity to receive them as a guest if you don't pass the test first on a website or Facebook page or both. Right? So hear this. Put real pictures in those places. Don't use stock photos that don't represent what's going on in the life of the congregation. People are going to be more concerned and upset when they show up thinking that you really do have 25 kids in children's ministry, and they show up and there's one. I mean, be who you are, right? If you do Facebook as an outreach, meaning an evangelism tool, right? Too many times we put a Facebook presence and it's all full of internal stuff, right? People love to see pictures as much as they see writings on Facebook. On your website, please don't make me do 4 clicks to find out when worship is. The worship times, your address needs to be on the front page without having to scroll all the way to the bottom or multiple clicks. Please don't use churchy words. And do you know that contemporary and traditional first are churchy words, and secondly, they're meaningless at this point because who knows what anything means. So let people know what they could expect. You know, when you know what to expect, it's kind of easier to go into an unknown place. New here, be our guest, some sort of tab directly off the homepage where I can go and hear, not that it's a traditional worship at 9 o'clock. No, we have a worship experience with a choir and hymns and an organ. Tell me what I can wear. Tell me what's going to happen with children if I happen to bring some. Tell me where to park. Tell me which door to come in. That's the secret normally. Which door do I come in? Right? Church is scary for a lot of people. And if they're trying to give you the opportunity, make it as easy as possible. Let them know what to expect so it's not quite as scary. Online presence and making it geared toward potential new people is extremely important. You may never, ever get the opportunity to have them as a guest if we don't do the online presence. And if you have to choose one or the other, you're a smaller church, do Facebook. It's easier, but please don't do Facebook if you're not going to do Facebook. That's even worse, to do a Facebook page and not post but once every few months. It needs to be multiple times a week. Okay? Then when you get to the church, what hospitality looks like, and as my previous bishop would say, Bishop Snazy would say, it's not hospitality, it's what? Radical hospitality. It goes above and beyond expectations. Because expectations, if you just meet that, that's not okay. It was an all right experience. I mean, think about restaurant experiences. You have certain expectations of just meeting the mark. But what we're talking about is going above and beyond expectations with radical hospitality. Before anybody's bottom hits this pew, I would want them to have 3 acts of hospitality. Outside, at the exterior door, and at the door to the sanctuary. Minimum. Minimum. If you have multiple doors, we're going to have to do multiple lines of hospitality. But friends, I can't tell you the number of churches that I've been in and out of in the last 100 days where I've been able to come and worship and get back in my car and never been spoken to. Now, it's getting less and less likely for me to do that as more and more of you know my face. But it's happening and it's breaking my heart. Because what if I was that person who I've tried everything else and I'm looking for hope. I'm looking for a relationship. And we blew it. And we blew it. So if you've got to start somewhere with the wows, start with hospitality. Just let people know that you're glad that they're there and somebody cares about them. And it isn't a good morning, plaster the Sunday smile on your face. We all can do that well. Because it's not about being friendly. It's about offering friendships. It's about offering relationships. If someone shows up at your door on their own, something's up. More likely than not, something is up. Probably something big. They just moved to town. They've just been diagnosed with some disease. A loved one has been lost. Maybe they're having a baby. Maybe they just got married. It's a huge transition in their life, typically, if they show up at your door. And are we prepared for that? Friendliness isn't enough. Radical hospitality with the opportunity for a relationship is what people are looking for. How are we dialing up our Sunday morning experiences with great preaching and wow worship? What's your number? What's your number on a scale of 1 to 10? And maybe you even want to use 2 scales. Maybe you want to separate how's your preaching and how's the worship experience, because those may be different on the scale. I'm not sure about your context, but you might want to think about it in that way. Write your number down, or numbers. All right, take a few minutes and share. All right, number 9. We got to have some fun. Effective pastors have fun. Okay? And growing churches have fun. We got to enjoy what we're doing. Can't be doom and gloom. Let's have some fun. Let's enjoy one another. And frankly, this may be one of the most underrated elements of effectiveness. We just kind of think about church in different ways sometimes. But how are we having fun in a church, individually, with our teams, with our staff? A pastor in church just got to have some fun. Isn't there a song? Girls just want to have fun. Churches just want to have fun. Pastors just want to have fun. That'll preach probably, right? Effective pastors build fun into their routine. They build fun in the routine of the church. Have you ever thought about looking at your calendar personally and from the church going, where are we having fun here? Where are we enjoying one another? Where are we laughing with one another? Is it happening in your church? Is it happening in your life? And by having fun, you're modeling it, and your congregation just sees the human side of you. Yeah, I want to be around them. They have fun. They're fun to be around. What better way to show it than by having fun also with your congregation? Your church is a family of various sizes. Each of your churches is a different size. But a family without fun doesn't stay together long. What does that say about our churches that aren't having fun? Are you having fun as a pastor? If not, change it. Make yourself have fun. How about staff? What are you doing intentionally to have fun with staff? You know, when you're just enjoying one another's company, doing something silly, you show up in a different way, don't you? I mean, even at the conference office when it's Friday casual day, there's a difference in the air when you're in casual clothes than when you're in business casual or whatever the case may be. You loosen up a little bit. The same with intentionally finding ways to have fun. It builds a different kind of relationship. You see a different side. It takes down the barriers, perhaps. So think about your staff. Now, some of you have paid staff, but most of us have unpaid staff. How are you intentionally pouring into them, not only equipping them, but how are you having fun? How are you having fun? Have you planned intentionally for fun? Take a few minutes. First of all, what's your number? 1 to 10. Write your number down. How are you having fun personally? How are you having fun as a church? Maybe those are 2 different numbers. Maybe they're the same. Not sure. And share briefly. Are you having fun? All right, let's move into the traits of effective churches. Take a look at this picture. What does this picture say to you? What's it a picture of? Storm, conflict. What'd you say, Deb?
I said the light is kind of spreading out.
Oh, the light is spreading out. What did some of the rest of you see? Oh, you see it as contained. You see it as peaceful.
It's restful.
Restful. What you?
I'm sorry, we were still talking when you
Oh,
said, are we supposed to be describing what we see in the picture?
what is it that you see in that picture?
I see a lightning storm. A cloud with lightning and rain.
Well, maybe that's why Ebbington didn't approve this as the cover, because of the many different interpretations. When I saw that, I saw it as lightning in a bottle. And when I was thinking about the effective traits of a pastor, and then thinking about effective traits of a church, to have both of those happen in the same place at the same time is kind of like lightning in a bottle. How would we capture that special place, the special opportunity? Think about this, and I'm sure y'all have been in a variety of situations. But what if we have an effective pastor that goes into a congregation that isn't effective? What happens to that pastor?
If he's effective, he gets motivated, or more motivated.
Drains your energy. What'd we hear over here?
Depends on the pastor, I imagine.
Depends on the pastor. What are possibilities?
Well, maybe the pastor's gifted in that area and can bring them to effectiveness.
Maybe.
Maybe somebody is not, and they get very tired.
Get tired, potentially. What else could happen? Is this the way all churches are? No reason to work hard. They're not going to do anything. Could taint them for even future appointments sometimes. Now, let's flip it over. What if you've got a very highly effective congregation and they receive an ineffective pastor? What could happen?
People leave.
That's when pastors get a new zip code?
Yes.
What else? Church declines. Church morale could go down, right? But the cool thing is, when we can bring this effective congregation and an effective pastor, it's like, get out of the way, cool things can happen. Now, that's not to say if we don't have a perfect match that things can't happen, but it's when we have this highly effective pastor that is sent to a highly effective congregation. It is a place where we just can't imagine the things that can happen. So let's look at, we've spent most of the day already looking at the effective traits, the traits of effective pastors. So let's look at the traits of effective congregations. I think there's two main ones. The first one is, I just say, they get it. The congregation just gets it. And I use the scriptural reference of Matthew 28:16. And most of you know it. The purpose of the church, right, is to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world, right? They get it. They know that's why they're there. And they have the passion and the drive to do it. The pastor and the staff, both paid and unpaid staff, see their role as equippers, not doers of ministry. In other words, they know how to build teams. Because see, the problem is we stunt our growth when all we do is ask people to do. Or we pay staff to do rather than equip. Then the equipping never gets done. I was having a conversation with the lead pastor earlier this week. and they were talking about hiring another person. And as I began to ask questions about it, I said, so what's the purpose? And how does this new position align with your mission and vision? There was silence on the other end of the phone. Hadn't really thought about that. So tell me, what's the driving factor of hiring another person? And they began to talk about all the doing that they want this person to do as an associate pastor. And I said, could we put this on pause for a moment and consider potentially a different way of thinking about this position? Because what you're telling me is that you have a whole bunch of teams that aren't effective. So doesn't it sound like we need someone who's a good equipper? And wouldn't that be a very different skill set than someone who can come in and lead a children's Sunday school class? See, because we've got into the mindset so many times of hiring people to do our ministry rather than our staff being seen as the equippers. Churches that get it have staff that are equippers, the equippers of the congregation to do the ministry, which I think that was the original intent. Congregations that get it, they always start with the why. Don't tell me what we're going to do until we know why. And the why always leads back to mission and vision. Always leads back to mission and vision. So everybody that's doing something in the life of the congregation, they see how it connects to the bigger picture. Congregations that get it know how to do that, how to connect everything to the bigger picture. Congregations that get it are able to tell their personal stories. That means that I know why God's important in my life. And I know how to tell the story in the appropriate ways, at the appropriate times, with the people that God urges me to do so with. Because they see themselves as evangelists. Every person in the pew sees themselves as an evangelist. They didn't hire their pastor to be the evangelist. Congregations that get it equip people not only to do ministry, but they equip people to know and to tell their stories. In congregations that get it, the congregation lives in the mission field. In other words, we are not a drive-in church. That's how we lose our church faster than anything else, is the church remains in the same neighborhood, but the people who originally went there moved away. They moved 5 miles or 10 miles out, and they become a drive-in church. And because they become a drive-in church, they've lost the understanding of their mission field. But churches that get it, they have people from their neighborhood that are serving in the life of the congregation. And therefore, they're able to reach their neighbors because they are the neighbor. Churches that get it are mission field oriented. In other words, they know they have 2 mission fields. The first mission field is those that don't yet know Christ in their neighborhood. The second mission field are those of us that are already here. And we clearly understand that the first mission field is priority. Because if we think it's the other way around, that means we haven't gotten it. We are not going to be effective. Churches that get it have a significant school relationship. A significant school relationship. Now, friends, that does not mean necessarily that we pack meals for children that we never see or know their names. That's not a relationship. That's doing a good deed. But I'm talking about eyeball to eyeball relational evangelism. You see, we can do Matthew 25 all day long, and God calls us to do that, but the problem is sometimes we forget there's the Matthew 28 piece of it. It's good news and good deeds together, not in isolation. And too often, we're spending all of our time in Matthew 25, doing good deeds, writing checks. And we forget that we're called to disciple other people. But churches that get it, they understand that. And the very school that's in their neighborhood, they have a significant relationship with. That means rather than on on Teacher Appreciation Day, rather than going and dropping off cookies in the office the night before, no, instead, we're going to go in and we're going to set those teachers down at a table with a tablecloth and real plates and silverware and say, may we serve you as you serve the children of this community. May we break bread with you. Tell us what you need. How can we be helpful? See, that's a school relationship. Doing things from afar, great. We need to do some of those things. But too often, I think sometimes that's the easy way out, because then we can feel okay about doing some good things. But we never do the most important thing of sharing Jesus. Churches that get it are relationship centered, and the processes come behind. It's not about the processes so much, but they support us building relationships with one another, and especially with those in the mission field. Churches that get it do understand the two mission fields and the priority of those that aren't yet here. And churches that get it have people that serve on Sunday rather than be served. Remember the story I talked about earlier about the Sunday school class was in session right up until worship time, and no one wanted to miss their Sunday school class to greet the guests that would come through the door. Churches that get it may have children's Sunday school or children's church on Sunday, but they don't have adults Sunday school. Because then we have enough people to teach our children and do the greeters and all the other things that need to be done on Sunday. Instead, they take another evening, maybe even in a home, to do their discipleship. Because, see, they get it. They get it's not about them, that it's about serving on Sunday. And instead, I will be fed somewhere else on a different time, maybe, than a different day. Think about your church. Does your church get it? Do they get it? One being inwardly focused, it's about us. 10 being, we truly get it. We are all about the mission. We are all about responsibility. It's about taking responsibility for the souls that have been placed in our neighborhood. And that's what keeps us up at night. Not what paint color we're going to put on the walls or what carpet we're going to choose. But the souls of those who don't yet know Christ are what keep us up at night. Those are the churches that get it. What's your number between 1 and 10? Write it down. Take a few minutes to share. All right, let's move on to the second trait of an effective church. The second trait of an effective church is they are permission-giving partners. They find out more ways to say yes than no, but they're not afraid to say no to the things that don't align. Because they are in it together, they share risk and rewards, and they know that that's going to happen, but they're in it together because they're collaborative partners, they're teammates. It isn't clergy in the congregation or the staff in the congregation. We see ourselves on one team all working together, and we're partners in the mission. We have common purpose and direction. We all know where we're headed. The problem is we have churches too often that have no idea where we're headed. We do church, we get that. We get that we come for an hour on Sunday, but we haven't done a great job over the years to help people understand the true purpose. But when we have a permission-giving partnership church, they do know their purpose and they know their direction. And it isn't that they can just quote the mission and the vision, but they know what their part is in it. They know what gift that they have been given and how they're using it in the partnership, in the direction forward. They watch for and they correct what I call missional shift. That means if we have been doing something, first of all, we evaluate everything. And we allow each other to be accountable to one another for a missional shift, meaning where are we getting off purpose? We have the best of intentions, but over time, it has shifted away from its original purpose and its alignment. And we're willing to say no, just as much as we're willing to say yes. One of the churches I was working with uses this criteria to determine if they're going to do a ministry or not. So let's say somebody comes to the pastor with a new ministry idea. Here's the questions. Tell me how it aligns with our mission of making disciples. Second question. Tell me how it aligns with our vision. Third question. How does it align with our goals, our priorities for this year? Next question. So tell me, what group of people are also passionate about this that you have gathered together that are going to do this ministry? And the last question, what resources have you put together to make this happen? If we can work through all of this, do you know what the answer is? Yes, please, go and do. But if we get stumped anywhere, it's not in alignment and we say no. I was at a board meeting about a year ago, and it was all over a community garden. Okay? This particular church had about 20 acres, and they had, about a quarter of an acre tilled up, and they were doing this community garden. And so you said, so what's the outcome of this community garden? Well, we harvest everything. Great. Then what do we do with it? Well, we bring it into the church, and then what? Well, we put it out on the table. And then what? Well, people take it home. What people? On Sunday, the congregation. Help me understand how that's a community garden. Help me understand how that aligns with the mission. Oh, it has the basket there. Throw in a buck. And it goes towards mission. So I was at a board meeting, and the particular man who had been doing this community garden, and this church had been going through transformation and appointment change, and they were trying to get everything in alignment, and they really were trying to manage down the garden. Do you know what I mean now? Remember? Manage down, lead up, manage down. We're trying to kill it off, folks, remember? Okay. I was trying to be PC here. So the man came because he had gone to the pastor And the pastor asked all those questions, and the man said, well, nobody's interested in the garden. And he said, well, it sounds like that's not a ministry that we can pour into at this point because we have no interest for anyone to actually be the hands and feet in Christ and make that ministry happen. He didn't like the answer. So guess what? He went to the board chair. And the board chair allowed that to come onto the agenda, which it never should have. I just happened to be there because I was coaching them on simplified structure. And that's where the night started. We talked for 30 minutes. No, I didn't talk. I listened and fumed. For 30 minutes about the garden, about all the reasons that the people in the congregation should be excited and participate in this garden. You see, nobody had the guts to do the truth telling and say, how does this align with our mission? Nobody had the guts to support the pastor of the question around, nobody else is interested. Everything has an expiration date, including ministries. It sounds like this has an expiration date and we need to get it off the shelf. You see, rather than talking about making disciples, we spent 30 minutes of 12 people's time talking about a garden that nobody else was interested in than that one person. See, permission-giving partners say yes, and they also say no. Permission-giving partners have leaders and equippers who have lively conversations resulting in a unified voice. That does not say a unified opinion. Do you hear the difference? Please, everyone who's in leadership, to have this conversation. Let's put it out there. Let's have lively conversation. Let's remind ourselves how it aligns with mission and vision. Ultimately, we make a decision. And I don't care how I felt about it personally, whether I was personally on board or not. As a member, as a leader of that church, I walk out of there with the leadership covenant to say we are one unified voice. You see, churches that get it don't allow the parking lot conversations where it says, well, Bill, that was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard. I didn't support it. They voted yes, but I think it's the stupidest thing we ever did. I just negated all authority of the board by being a board member that would have had that conversation. You see, permission-giving partner churches don't do that. They have healthy conflict management. Remember, conflict is a good thing. It's how we manage it. I had one large church pastor that said, it's taken me 20 years, but I have finally learned that I run after conflict, not away from it. Because when you run away from it, it's like a snowball. Coming down the mountain, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it picks up rocks and all other sorts of crap on the way down, does it not?
There's times when you just need to walk away from it.
So we have healthy conflict management. We embrace conflict and we deal with it in biblical ways, but we don't ignore it. Permission-giving partners have strategic planning, providing focus and direction. Every year, your board needs to go away and say, how did we do this year in our mission and our vision, and particularly our goals? And what is God calling us in 2018 to prioritize with? And then you come back and do ministry around those three things. If you're planning by taking your 2017 calendar and copying it to your 2018 calendar, might I suggest that that's not strategic? But how often do we do planning in that way? What if we started with a blank calendar and we said instead, what are the things we need to do this year to be most faithful in making disciples, to living into God's preferred future that we call our vision? And we start there, rather than copying our calendar over from one year to the next. See, that's where that intentional and that strategic that we talked about this morning come into play. So there's a book called Just Say Yes from Bishop Snazy. He says congregations that say yes and operational systems never become more permission-giving than the people who lead them. Your processes can't be any more permission-giving than the very people that lead them. Scale of 1 to 10. How much of a permission-giving congregation is your church? Write a number down quickly. All right, for the sake of time, you all have your number recorded. So I'm going to allow you to take that conversation back to your congregation and think about and process with them. Here's some things I'd like for you to think about. Look back over, first of all, the first 9 traits of your personal leadership. Look back over those numbers that you gave yourself. What is the area that you would like to work on in the upcoming months? Okay? Name it. I want you to turn your paper over on the back, and I want you to write down that trait that you're making a commitment to work on in the upcoming months. Identify which one.
Which one do I pick?
It's up to you. All right, turn to your neighbor. This is where accountability comes into play. So if you don't know each other, exchange numbers now. Turn to your neighbor and tell them which trait you're going to be working on. All right, did you also identify when you're going to check in with one another? Right? If you're accountability partners, that's what we're going to do. Right? Now, who else do you need to talk to about this? Back in your congregation. Okay? What do you need to share when you go back to your churches? Remember what we talked about in the very beginning today. This is not a time of us just gaining more head knowledge, but this is a time of learning so that we can apply. So here's my questions to you all is, what's the application look like? What are you going to work on? When are you going to work on it? And who's going to be your accountability partner? Now, I could ask your district superintendent to lock the doors until all of that work is done, but I'm going to just have faith in you that you're going to do all of those steps. Yes? Right? So here's the conclusion if we're going to wrap it all up. When an effective pastor who's practicing the 9 traits that we covered earlier serves an effective congregation, practicing the 2 traits we just went over, we indeed get fruit from the mission field. That's our best possible chance. So friends, what are we going to do to be more effective leaders and have more effective churches? That's our work before us. That's our work before us. What's the one thing you're taking away from our time today? Just yell them out. One thing. And this is not a sermon. It's a word or a phrase.
Focus.
Focus. Love it. What else? Intentionality. Purpose. Action. Focus. Love it. Love it. Please take this information back. Don't keep it to yourself. Share it at your board meetings. Share it at staff, wherever it's appropriate. If you're in clusters, you might even dissect each of the 9+2 traits in your clusters. Take one each time and spend some time on that. It would be helpful for one another to be looking at it together. All right, thank you for giving up a beautiful fall day to come and learn and perhaps be a bit challenged. I hope so, right? And may this be a time that bears fruit for the kingdom in your churches.